I discovered my godson squatting in an abandoned building. His stepfather had kicked him out and kept the trust fund his mother left him. I took him in immediately. The very next day, I went to that stepfather's workplace, and what I revealed to his boss ended his career. I found Ethan at 3:42 in the morning on a Wednesday in November, curled up in a sleeping bag on the concrete floor of an abandoned textile factory on the east side of town. The building had been condemned for 18 months. All the windows were either broken or boarded up, and there was a hole in the roof that let rain pour directly onto what used to be the production floor. He was sleeping in what looked like an old supervisor's office, the only room with a door that still closed, with a battery-powered lantern next to him and a backpack that held everything he owned. The temperature outside was 38 degrees and dropping. Inside that building, it couldn't have been much warmer than 45. When I shook his shoulder to wake him, his eyes opened slowly, unfocused, like he'd been sleeping so deeply his body had shut down to conserve warmth. Then recognition hit, and his face crumpled immediately. Uncle David. His voice came out hoarse and broken. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't mean for you to find me like this." I pulled him up and into a hug before he could say anything else. He was lighter than he should have been, probably 15 pounds underweight, and he was shaking from cold or exhaustion or both. He'd been my godson for 19 years since his mother Rebecca asked me to stand up at his baptism when he was 3 months old. She'd been my best friend since college, the kind of friendship that transcended time and distance, the person who knew all my secrets and loved me anyway. When she'd died from ovarian cancer 2 years ago at 43, she'd made me promise to look after Ethan. I'd promised because of course I had. She was dying, and he was her only child, and I loved them both. Now here he was, 19 years old and homeless, sleeping in an abandoned building like he had nobody in the world who cared about him. "How long have you been here?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. 3 weeks, maybe a month. He wouldn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the concrete floor, on the sleeping bag, on anything except my face. I lost track after a while. It all kind of blurs together when you're just trying to stay warm and find enough food to not feel hungry all the time. A month. A full month my godson had been living in an abandoned building and I hadn't known. Hadn't checked on him closely enough. Hadn't noticed something was catastrophically wrong. The guilt hit me like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I'd been so caught up in my own life, my work at the architecture firm, my routine of meetings and deadlines and client presentations, that I'd let this happen. I'd failed Rebecca, and I'd failed Ethan. "Where's Gregory?" I asked, even though I already knew this had something to do with his stepfather. "Where's your home?" That's when Ethan started crying. Not the quiet tears you can blink away, but the full-body sobs of someone who'd been holding everything inside for weeks and finally had permission to break. He said I couldn't live there anymore. He changed the locks while I was at my job. I came home from my shift at the restaurant and my key didn't work. All my stuff was in garbage bags on the porch. He left a note that said I was 18 now, legally an adult, and he had no obligation to provide for me anymore. He said if I tried to come back or cause trouble, he'd call the police and have me arrested for trespassing. The shaking in his body got worse as he talked. I tried to tell him about Mom's trust fund, about the money she left me for college, but he just laughed. He said I had no proof of any trust fund, that Mom never left me anything, that I was delusional if I thought I was entitled to his money just because he'd married my mother. I felt my hands curl into fists. Gregory Thornton. The man Rebecca had married 3 years before she died, during her first remission when she'd thought she was getting better and wanted companionship and stability for Ethan. The man who'd seemed kind and supportive during her illness, who'd held her hand through chemo appointments and made her soup when she was too nauseous to eat solid food. The man who'd cried at her funeral and promised to take care of Ethan like he was his own son. The man who'd apparently waited exactly long enough for Ethan to turn 18 before kicking him out and stealing his inheritance. I'd never liked Gregory, had always felt something off about him, something too smooth in the way he talked and too calculated in his gestures of kindness. But Rebecca had loved him, and Ethan had seemed happy enough, so I'd kept my concerns to myself. Now I was looking at the consequences of that silence. "Get your things. We're leaving." I pulled Ethan to his feet. "You're coming home with me. You're staying as long as you need. And tomorrow we're going to figure out exactly what Gregory has done and how to fix it." Ethan grabbed his backpack and sleeping bag, moving with the exhausted efficiency of someone who'd done this before, who'd learned to pack up fast and move locations when necessary. The thought made me sick. We walked out of that condemned building into the November cold, and I unlocked my car, a 2019 Subaru Outback that suddenly felt absurdly luxurious compared to where Ethan had been sleeping. He climbed into the passenger seat and put his hands up to the heating vents, letting the warm air wash over his face. In the dome light, I could see how thin he'd gotten, how dark the circles under his eyes were, how his clothes hung loose on his frame. This was a kid who used to play soccer and eat 3 full meals plus snacks. Now he looked like he'd been starving. We drove back to my house in silence. I lived in a 3-bedroom Craftsman in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown, the kind of house I'd bought 5 years ago when my architecture firm had taken off and I'd finally had enough saved for a down payment. It had always felt too big for just me, but now I was grateful for the extra space. I showed Ethan to the guest room, turned on the heat, found clean towels, and told him to shower as long as he wanted. While he was in the bathroom, I made scrambled eggs and toast and hot chocolate, comfort food that was easy on a stomach that probably wasn't used to regular meals. When he came out 30 minutes later, hair still damp and wearing clean clothes I'd found in my closet that were too big on him, he looked a little more human. We sat at my kitchen table and he ate slowly, carefully, like he was worried the food might disappear if he went too fast. Tell me everything. I waited until he'd finished most of his plate. Start from the beginning. What happened with the trust fund? Ethan took a long breath. Mom set it up 2 months before she died. I remember because she made me come to the lawyer's office with her. She wanted me to understand what she was doing and why. The lawyer was a woman named Catherine Brennan. She had an office downtown. Mom put $460,000 into the trust. It was everything she had from selling her parents' house after they died, and her life insurance policy and all her savings. She set it up so I'd get access when I turned 21 for college and living expenses. But Gregory was named as the trustee until then, since he was my legal guardian. Mom made Catherine explain to me that being trustee didn't mean the money was his. It meant he was supposed to manage it responsibly and only use it for my benefit. Education, housing, medical expenses, that kind of thing. She made him sign papers promising to do that. $460,000. A life-changing amount of money for a 19-year-old kid. Money that should have paid for college, for an apartment, for a start in life that didn't involve sleeping in condemned buildings, and Gregory was the trustee. I asked the obvious question. Do you have any documentation? Any papers from Catherine Brennan? Any proof the trust exists? Ethan shook his head. Everything was at the house. I had copies of the trust documents in my room, bank statements, everything. When Gregory kicked me out, he didn't include any of that in the bags he left on the porch. Just my clothes and some books and my laptop. I tried calling Catherine Brennan's office, but the number was disconnected. I looked her up online and found out she retired 6 months ago and closed her practice. I don't know where the trust documents are now or how to prove the money existed. I pulled out my phone and started taking notes. We were going to need to reconstruct everything from scratch. What bank was the trust account with? Ethan thought for a moment. Pacific Northwest Bank, the branch on Hawthorne Boulevard. Mom took me there once to show me the account, said I should know where my future was being kept safe. Do you remember the account number? No, but it was under my name, Ethan Novak, with Gregory Thornton listed as trustee. That was something. Not much, but something. What about other family? Anyone who might have copies of the trust documents or who could verify the account existed? Ethan's face fell. Mom was an only child. Her parents died before I was born. Gregory's family lives out of state and I've only met them twice. They don't know anything about Mom's finances. The only person who knew everything was Catherine Brennan, and she's gone. I made coffee while Ethan finished eating, my mind already working through the logistics. It was 4:30 in the morning now, too early to call anyone, but as soon as business hours hit, I'd start making moves. First, contact Pacific Northwest Bank and see if they could verify the trust account existed. Second, track down Catherine Brennan, even though she'd retired, because lawyers keep records, and she might still have copies of the trust documents. Third, figure out what Gregory had done with the money and whether there was any way to prove he'd misappropriated funds. Fourth, and this was the one that made my stomach churn with anger, figure out how to make him pay for what he'd done to Ethan. For the homelessness, for the stolen inheritance, for violating the trust Rebecca had placed in him when she'd made him Ethan's guardian. Ethan fell asleep on my couch around 5 in the morning, exhaustion finally winning out over stress and fear. I covered him with a blanket and let him sleep while I sat at my kitchen table making lists and timelines and plans. By 7, I was calling my office to cancel my morning meetings. By 8, I was on the phone with Pacific Northwest Bank, navigating their automated system until I finally reached a human being in their trust services department. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. My godson's mother had set up a trust account at their bank 2 years ago. The trustee had potentially misappropriated the funds, and the beneficiary was now homeless. I needed to verify whether the account existed and get copies of all documentation. The banker, a woman named Patricia Simmons with 15 years in trust management, listened carefully and then asked for Ethan's social security number and date of birth. I woke Ethan up to get the information. He was groggy and confused, but gave me what I needed. Patricia put me on hold for 11 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed, more formal, more careful. Mr. Novak, I can confirm that a trust account was established in February 2 years ago with Ethan Novak as beneficiary and Gregory Thornton as trustee. The initial deposit was $462,000. However, I'm seeing a series of withdrawals over the past 18 months that have depleted the account significantly. The current balance is $12,341. My stomach dropped. Over $400,000 gone. Where did the money go? Can you tell me what the withdrawals were for? Patricia hesitated. I can see the transaction descriptions, but I can't discuss the details without proper authorization. What I can tell you is that the withdrawals were made by Gregory Thornton in his capacity as trustee. If you believe there's been a breach of fiduciary duty, you'll need to consult with an attorney and potentially file a complaint. We take these matters seriously. But we need proper legal documentation before we can take action or release detailed records. Can you at least freeze the account so no more money disappears? I asked. Not without a court order, Mr. Novak. I'm sorry. The trustee has legal authority to manage the account until the beneficiary reaches 21. Unless you can prove the withdrawals were improper, my hands are tied. She gave me instructions for how to request account records through legal channels and recommended I contact an attorney immediately. I called Lawrence Keller at 9:15. He was an attorney who specialized in trust and estate litigation, someone I'd worked with on a client project 3 years ago when we'd been designing a building for a nonprofit he represented. He was in his late 50s, sharp as a blade, with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting his clients. His assistant tried to tell me he was booked solid for the week, but I explained this was an emergency and involved a minor whose inheritance had been stolen. Lawrence took my call 10 minutes later. David, what's going on? I gave him the full story. Rebecca's death, the trust fund, Gregory's guardianship, Ethan being kicked out, the depleted account, everything. When I finished, Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Get Ethan to my office at 2 this afternoon. Bring any documentation you have, anything at all. This is absolutely a breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on what Gregory spent the money on, it could be criminal fraud. We need to move fast before the rest of that $12,000 disappears." Ethan and I showed up at Lawrence's office at 1:50. The office was downtown in a modern building with glass walls and minimalist furniture. Lawrence met us in the conference room, a space with a long table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He was exactly as I remembered him. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, expensive suit that screamed competence and authority. He shook Ethan's hand and asked him to tell his story from the beginning. Ethan went through it all again, more details this time. How Gregory had seemed supportive at first, had taken him to his mother's grave on her birthday, had helped him apply to colleges. How things had changed around Ethan's 18th birthday. Gregory had become distant, irritable, had started making comments about Ethan needing to be more independent, more self-sufficient, had stopped buying groceries that Ethan liked and told him to get a job if he wanted spending money. Then 2 days after Ethan's birthday, Gregory had changed the locks and left his belongings on the porch with that note. Lawrence took notes the entire time. When Ethan finished, Lawrence asked specific questions. Did Gregory ever explain why he was withdrawing money from the trust? Did he show you bank statements or account summaries? Did he claim the withdrawals were for your benefit? Ethan shook his head to all of it. He never talked about the trust after Mom died. Whenever I asked about college money or the account Mom set up, he'd change the subject or tell me not to worry about it. The last time I asked, maybe 6 months ago, he got angry and told me I was ungrateful and needed to stop acting entitled to money that wasn't mine yet. That should have been a red flag, but I just thought he was stressed about work or something. I didn't realize he was stealing from me. Lawrence pulled up something on his laptop and turned the screen toward us. I've already submitted a request to Pacific Northwest Bank for full account records under emergency circumstances. I claimed there's evidence of ongoing theft and potential criminal activity. They'll likely comply within 48 hours once I file the supporting court documents. In the meantime, I'm going to file for an emergency injunction to freeze the remaining $12,000 and remove Gregory as trustee. We should be able to get a hearing within a week. The bigger question is what Gregory spent the money on and whether we can recover it. If he used it for legitimate expenses related to Ethan's care and upbringing, it gets complicated. If he used it for personal expenses, vacations, luxury items, we have a much stronger case. That's when Ethan spoke up, his voice quiet but certain. He bought a Porsche about a year ago. A 911, dark blue. He was really proud of it. Kept it in the garage and polished it every weekend. He also renovated the house, completely redid the kitchen and both bathrooms, probably $60,000 or $70,000 worth of work. And he took a trip to Europe last summer, 3 weeks in Italy and France. He invited me but said I'd have to pay my own way, which I couldn't afford on my restaurant salary. When I asked how he could afford all that, he said he'd gotten a bonus at work and made some good investments. I felt the anger that had been simmering in my chest start to boil. Lawrence's expression hardened. Did he claim any of those expenses were for your benefit? The house renovation, maybe? Ethan shook his head. He told me the renovation was his investment in the property, that I shouldn't expect to benefit from it since I'd be moving out soon anyway. The Porsche was definitely just for him, and he was pretty clear the Europe trip was his vacation, not mine. Lawrence started typing rapidly. This is fraud. Clear, straightforward fraud. He used trust funds meant for your education and welfare to buy himself luxury items and take personal vacations. That's a textbook breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal conversion of assets. We're not just looking at civil penalties here, Ethan. Depending on how the DA's office views this, Gregory could face criminal charges. Are you prepared for that? Are you ready for this to get very public and very ugly? Ethan looked at me, and I nodded. He looked back at Lawrence. He stole my mother's money. Money she saved her entire life and left for me because she wanted me to have opportunities she never had. He took that and bought himself a sports car while I was sleeping in an abandoned building. Yeah, I'm ready for this to get ugly. I want every penny back, and I want him to face consequences. Lawrence smiled, the kind of smile that would terrify anyone on the receiving end of his litigation. Good. Give me 48 hours to get the account records and file the injunction. In the meantime, document everything. Every conversation you remember with Gregory about the trust, every expense you know he made with the money, every detail about when and how he kicked you out. We're going to build a timeline that shows exactly how he systematically stole from a teenager whose mother had just died, and when we're done, Gregory Thornton is going to wish he'd never heard the name Novak. We left Lawrence's office at 3:30 with a plan and something I hadn't felt since finding Ethan that morning. Hope. Real, tangible hope that we could fix this and get justice for Rebecca and her son. That evening, I did something I'd been thinking about since the bank confirmed the trust account existed. I looked up Gregory Thornton's employment information. Ethan had mentioned he worked in pharmaceutical sales, some big company with offices downtown. A quick LinkedIn search showed me everything I needed. Gregory was a senior sales director at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had been there for 8 years, currently managed a team of 12 sales representatives. His profile was full of corporate achievement posts and professional networking. He looked successful, respectable, trustworthy. Exactly the kind of person you'd never suspect of stealing from his dead wife's teenage son. I clicked through to Meridian's website and found their corporate directory. Gregory's boss was listed as Ronald Atkinson, VP of West Coast Sales Operations. I spent 2 hours that night researching Meridian Pharmaceuticals' corporate ethics policies. Like most major companies, they had extensive guidelines about employee conduct, conflicts of interest, and legal compliance. There was an entire section about how employees were expected to maintain the highest standards of integrity, both professionally and personally, and how violations of legal or ethical standards could result in immediate termination. There was also a whistleblower hotline and an ethics reporting system. I saved everything to a folder on my laptop. Tomorrow, after I'd had time to think through exactly how to approach this, I'd make a decision about what to do with that information. But the idea forming in my mind was simple. Gregory had stolen from a kid. He'd committed fraud. And his employer, a company that claimed to value integrity and ethics, deserved to know what kind of person they'd put in a leadership position. The bank records arrived Thursday afternoon via encrypted email to Lawrence's office. He called me at 4:30 and told me to come downtown immediately, to bring Ethan. The records were worse than we'd thought. We sat in Lawrence's conference room staring at 18 months of transactions on a large monitor. $462,000 in initial deposit. Then the withdrawals started 3 months after Rebecca's death. $10,000 here, $15,000 there, always with vague descriptions like household expenses or education costs or medical necessities. But when you added them up over 18 months, they totaled $449,659. Someone had systematically drained a trust fund meant for a teenager's future and left him with $12,000 in change. Lawrence had cross-referenced the withdrawal dates with other information he'd gathered. A Porsche 911 purchased for $83,000 on a date that matched a $45,000 withdrawal labeled education expenses, followed by smaller withdrawals that likely covered taxes and fees. A kitchen renovation contracted for $62,000 that corresponded with multiple withdrawals totaling $68,000 labeled home maintenance, even though the home belonged to Gregory and had nothing to do with Ethan's welfare. Airline tickets and hotel bookings for a European vacation charged to a credit card that was paid off with a $32,000 withdrawal labeled Summer Enrichment Program. Every single withdrawal had been disguised as a legitimate expense related to Ethan's care. Every single one had actually been personal spending for Gregory's benefit. Ethan stared at the screen like he couldn't process what he was seeing. His hands were shaking. "That's my college education," he said quietly. "That's 4 years of tuition and housing. That's my whole future sitting there in a list of lies. He bought a car with my college fund. He renovated his kitchen with money my mom saved for me. How do you even do that? How do you look at a kid whose mother just died and decide to steal everything she left him?" Lawrence pulled up another document. "It gets worse. I ran Gregory's financial records, public information I could access through court databases. He filed for bankruptcy 7 years ago. Significant debt, foreclosure on a previous property, the whole thing. When he married Rebecca 3 years ago, he was still climbing out of financial ruin. The trust fund your mother set up wasn't just convenient for him, Ethan. It was salvation. He saw $400,000 sitting there and decided it was his way out of debt and into the lifestyle he wanted. I felt sick. Rebecca had married this man thinking he'd protect her son. She'd trusted him with the most important thing in her life, and he'd waited until she was dead and buried and couldn't stop him, then systematically stolen everything she'd left for Ethan. It wasn't just fraud. It was a betrayal of the deepest kind," Lawrence continued. "The good news is, this makes our case ironclad. The bad news is getting the money back is going to be difficult. The Porsche could be seized and sold, but it's a depreciating asset. He probably paid $83,000, but it's worth maybe $60,000 now. The renovation added value to his house, but forcing a sale to recover those funds is complicated and time-consuming. The vacation money is just gone, spent, and unrecoverable. We might get back $100,000 if we're lucky, maybe $150,000. The rest is effectively lost unless Gregory has other assets we can attach." "What about criminal charges?" I asked. "Can we get the DA involved?" Lawrence nodded. "I've already reached out to the District Attorney's Office, Financial Crimes Division. I'm meeting with Assistant DA Monica Thornhill tomorrow morning. With this level of documentation, she'll almost certainly open an investigation. The charges would likely be first-degree theft, criminal breach of trust, potentially multiple counts of fraud. We're looking at felony charges with potential prison time. But here's the thing you need to understand. Criminal prosecution takes time. Months, sometimes years. The wheels of justice move slowly. If you want faster results, if you want Gregory to face immediate consequences, we need to think creatively. That's when I told them my plan. I'd been thinking about it all day, refining it, making sure it would work. Gregory works for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, senior sales director. He manages a team, represents the company to clients and hospitals. His entire career depends on his reputation for integrity and trustworthiness. What happens if his employer finds out he's under investigation for stealing $400,000 from his dead wife's teenage son? Lawrence leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. They'd fire him immediately. Corporate ethics policies don't allow for that kind of liability. An employee facing felony charges, especially fraud charges, becomes a massive legal and PR risk. They'd terminate his employment before the end of the day. Exactly. I pulled out my laptop and showed them Meridian's ethics policies, their corporate values statement, their employee conduct guidelines. I've already drafted an email to Ronald Atkinson, Gregory's direct supervisor. It outlines the situation factually, includes links to the court documents Lawrence is filing, mentions the pending criminal investigation, and politely suggests that Meridian might want to review whether Gregory Thornton meets their standards for leadership positions. I don't threaten, I don't demand anything. I just inform them of facts and let them draw their own conclusions. Lawrence reviewed the email carefully. This is good. Very good. You're not making any false statements. You're not engaging in harassment or defamation. You're simply providing factual information to an employer who has a legitimate interest in knowing about their employees' criminal conduct. They can't sue you for this, and it's likely to be devastatingly effective. When are you planning to send it? Tomorrow morning, right after the DA's office confirms they're opening an investigation. That gives me the most recent, most credible information to include. Ethan looked at me with something like awe in his eyes. You're going to destroy his career. In one email, you're going to take away everything he stole and built with Mom's money. I met his eyes directly. He destroyed your future first, Ethan. He took your education, your security, your mother's final gift to you. I'm just making sure he faces appropriate consequences. Sometimes the justice system is too slow. Sometimes you have to hit people where they'll actually feel it. For Gregory, that's his career and his reputation. Tomorrow morning, he's going to learn that actions have consequences. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about Rebecca, about the promises I'd made at her bedside when she was dying. Take care of my boy, she'd whispered, her voice weak from the cancer that was eating her alive. Make sure he's okay. Make sure he gets his chance. I'd held her hand and promised I would, never imagining that the biggest threat to Ethan would come from the man she'd married, the man she'd trusted to be his guardian. I thought about Ethan sleeping in that condemned building, cold and hungry and alone, while Gregory drove his stolen Porsche and enjoyed his renovated kitchen. The anger I felt was cold and sharp, the kind that doesn't fade, but instead crystallizes into absolute determination. Gregory Thornton had made a catastrophic mistake when he'd stolen from Ethan. He'd bet that a 19-year-old kid would be too powerless, too uninformed, too beaten down to fight back. He'd forgotten about me. Friday morning at 8:45, I received confirmation from Lawrence that the DA's office was officially opening a criminal investigation into Gregory Thornton. Assistant DA Monica Thornhill, 13 years in financial crimes prosecution, had reviewed the bank records and agreed this was clear-cut theft and fraud. She'd be filing charges within the week and issuing a warrant for Gregory's arrest. I thanked Lawrence and opened my laptop. The email to Ronald Atkinson was already drafted, reviewed, and ready to send. I read through it one final time. Professional tone, factual presentation, no emotion or accusations, just a clear timeline of events and supporting documentation. I attached the court filing for the emergency injunction, a summary of the bank records showing the fraudulent withdrawals, and a copy of the DA's letter confirming the criminal investigation. Subject line, urgent ethics concern regarding employee Gregory Thornton. I clicked send at 9:02. Then I sat back and waited. The response came faster than I'd expected. At 10:15, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I answered and heard a professional female voice. Mr. Novak? This is Diane Fletcher, VP of Human Resources at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I received your email forwarded from Ronald Atkinson. I need to verify the information you've provided, and I'd like to speak with you in person if possible. Are you available to come to our office this morning? I told her I'd be there within the hour. She gave me the address and asked me to bring Ethan and any legal representation. I called Lawrence immediately and he agreed to meet us there. Meridian Pharmaceuticals occupied 4 floors of a glass tower downtown, the kind of building that screamed corporate success and financial power. Diane Fletcher met us in the lobby at 11:30. She was in her early 50s, perfectly professional in a charcoal suit, with the kind of expression that suggested she'd dealt with difficult situations before and knew exactly how to handle them. She escorted us to a conference room on the executive floor, offered coffee, which we declined, and asked us to walk through everything from the beginning. Lawrence did most of the talking, laying out the timeline with the precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Rebecca's death, the trust fund, Gregory's role as trustee, the systematic theft disguised as legitimate expenses, Ethan being made homeless, the current criminal investigation. Diane took notes on a tablet, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Lawrence finished, she looked directly at Ethan. I'm very sorry for what you've been through. I want you to know that Meridian takes ethics violations extremely seriously, especially when they involve our leadership team. Gregory Thornton's position gives him access to sensitive client information, financial data, and significant trust from our hospital and pharmacy partners. If he's engaged in theft and fraud in his personal life, we cannot allow him to continue representing our company. She turned to her tablet and pulled up something. I'm looking at Gregory's employment file now. He's had excellent performance reviews, strong sales numbers, no previous complaints or concerns. But that doesn't excuse criminal behavior. Based on what you've shown me and the pending criminal investigation, I'm recommending to our executive team that we terminate Gregory's employment immediately. How immediately? I asked. Today, she said firmly. I'll be meeting with our CEO and general counsel in 30 minutes. Unless there's information I'm not aware of that somehow exonerates Gregory, which seems unlikely given the documentation you've provided, he'll receive notice of termination before the end of business today. We'll also be conducting an internal investigation to ensure he hasn't engaged in any similar behavior involving company funds or resources. Mr. Keller, she turned to Lawrence, will you be filing civil suits in addition to the criminal charges? Absolutely, Lawrence said. We're seeking full restitution of the stolen funds plus damages. We'll be going after his assets, including the vehicle purchased with trust money. I expect we'll also be deposing Gregory extensively about his finances and spending patterns. Diane nodded. I'll make sure our legal team is aware they may receive subpoenas. We'll cooperate fully with any legitimate legal proceedings. She stood up, signaling the meeting was ending. Gentlemen, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know this doesn't fix what Gregory did to you, Ethan, but I hope knowing he's facing consequences provides at least some measure of justice. We'll be in touch if we need any additional information for our internal investigation. She walked us to the elevator and shook each of our hands. As the doors closed, I saw her already on her phone, probably calling the CEO's office. In the elevator going down, Lawrence looked at me with something like respect. That was masterful, David. Absolutely masterful. You just ended his career with one email and a 30-minute meeting. Gregory Thornton is going to be unemployed and facing felony charges before sundown. We found out later that Gregory received his termination notice at 2:45 that afternoon. He was called into a meeting with Diane Fletcher, Ronald Atkinson, and Meridian's general counsel. They presented him with the evidence, told him the company was aware of the criminal investigation, and informed him his employment was terminated effective immediately for violations of the company's ethics and conduct policies. He was escorted from the building by security, his access cards deactivated, his email account suspended. According to someone Lawrence knew in Meridian's legal department, Gregory had tried to deny everything, had claimed Ethan was lying, had insisted the trust fund money had been used appropriately. But when they'd shown him copies of the bank records and the DA's investigation letter, he'd gone pale and stopped talking. 20 minutes after being fired, he'd called his lawyer. That weekend, the criminal charges were officially filed. Gregory Thornton was charged with 3 counts of first-degree theft, 2 counts of criminal breach of trust, and 4 counts of fraud. The total value of the theft was listed as $449,659. Bail was set at $250,000. He posted it using his house as collateral, which meant if he fled or violated any conditions of release, he'd lose the property. Lawrence immediately filed a civil suit seeking full restitution plus $200,000 in punitive damages and all legal fees. We also filed a motion to seize the Porsche as proceeds of fraud. The court granted it, and the car was impounded pending the outcome of the case. Watching Gregory's expensive toy being towed away from his house gave me a satisfaction I probably shouldn't admit to. The case moved faster than expected. Gregory's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, claiming his client had made mistakes but hadn't intended to steal from Ethan. Lawrence and Monica Thornhill refused. The evidence was too clear, the theft too calculated, the betrayal too complete. This was going to trial, unless Gregory wanted to plead guilty to all charges and agree to full restitution. 2 weeks before trial was scheduled to begin, Gregory cracked. His lawyer called Lawrence with an offer. Gregory would plead guilty to all criminal charges, agree to full restitution of $449,000 plus $100,000 in damages, surrender any claim to Rebecca's estate or Ethan's trust, and accept whatever prison sentence the judge deemed appropriate. In exchange, he asked only that the prosecution not seek the maximum sentence. Lawrence brought the offer to Ethan and me. We were sitting in his office on a gray December afternoon, 3 months after I'd found Ethan in that abandoned building. Ethan had been living with me the entire time, had enrolled in community college for the spring semester, using what was left of the trust fund, had gotten a new job at a bookstore that paid better than the restaurant. He was putting weight back on, sleeping through the night, starting to look like himself again. Now he sat across from Lawrence's desk and considered the plea offer. If we reject this and go to trial, there's a chance Gregory gets acquitted or gets a lighter sentence, Lawrence explained. Juries are unpredictable. If we accept the plea, we're guaranteed he admits guilt publicly, faces prison time, and pays back the money. It's not perfect justice, but it's certain justice. Ethan looked at me. What do you think? I think your mother would want you to get your money back and move forward with your life. I think she'd want Gregory to face consequences, but she wouldn't want you spending years in courtrooms reliving this trauma. I think you should do whatever gives you peace." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Lawrence. "I'll accept the plea on one condition. Gregory has to allocate in court exactly what he did. I want him to stand in front of a judge and admit that he stole from his dead wife's son. I want it on the public record that he's not just a thief, but the kind of person who betrays a dying woman's trust." Lawrence smiled. "I can make that happen." The plea hearing was held on January 18th. The courtroom was small and cold, wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Gregory stood before Judge Harold Whitmore, 28 years on the bench, wearing an expensive suit that probably wouldn't fit him after however many years he'd spent in prison. His lawyer stood next to him. The prosecutor, Monica Thornhill, read the charges. Gregory pleaded guilty to each one. Then the judge asked him to allocate his crimes, to state in his own words what he'd done. Gregory's voice was barely audible. "I was named trustee of a trust fund left by my late wife, Rebecca Novak, for her son, Ethan. The trust contained $462,000 intended for his education and welfare. Over 18 months, I withdrew $449,000 from the trust and used it for personal expenses, including a vehicle purchase, home renovation, and vacation travel. I did not use the money for Ethan's benefit, as required by my fiduciary duty. I lied about the purpose of the withdrawals. I kicked Ethan out of his home when he turned 18 and refused him access to information about the trust. I stole from him." The judge stared at Gregory with something like contempt. "Mr. Thornton, in my 28 years on this bench, I've seen many kinds of theft. But stealing from a child whose mother entrusted you with his future, that's a special kind of betrayal. I'm accepting your guilty plea. Sentencing will be scheduled for 4 weeks from today. In the meantime, you'll remain free on bail with the understanding that any violation of your conditions will result in immediate incarceration. I suggest you use that time to think about the young man whose life you tried to destroy and what you can possibly do to make amends beyond the restitution you've agreed to pay." Gregory nodded, his face gray. His lawyer led him out of the courtroom. Ethan and I stayed sitting in the gallery. He was crying quietly, not from sadness, but from relief. It was over. Finally, completely over. Sentencing came 4 weeks later. Gregory was sentenced to 6 years in prison with possibility of parole after 4. He was ordered to pay $449,000 in restitution plus $100,000 in damages, payable immediately from the forced sale of his house and remaining assets. The Porsche had already been sold at auction for $61,000. His house sold for $380,000, minus the mortgage he still owed, leaving about $200,000 in equity. Combined with his retirement accounts and savings, he was able to pay the full $549,000 owed to Ethan. The rest of his debts would follow him out of prison, a financial burden that would take years to resolve. He'd lost his career, his home, his freedom, his reputation. Everything he'd stolen and built with Ethan's money was gone. Ethan used the restitution money exactly as Rebecca had intended. He enrolled full-time at the state university for the fall semester, planning to major in environmental science. He moved into a nice apartment near campus, bought himself a reliable used car, and started building the life his mother had wanted for him. We still had dinner together twice a week, and he still called me Uncle David even though he was technically an adult now and didn't need a godfather anymore. But that's not how it works with people you love. You don't stop being family just because the legal obligations end. Rebecca had asked me to take care of her son, and I was going to keep doing that for as long as he needed me. I think about that night sometimes, finding Ethan in that abandoned building. How different things could have been if I hadn't driven past that particular alley at that particular time. How Gregory almost got away with it. How close Ethan came to losing everything his mother had worked for and saved and protected. But I'd found him, and I'd kept my promise to Rebecca, and now Ethan was safe, and Gregory was in prison, and justice had been served in every way that mattered. The stepfather who'd stolen a trust fund and kicked out his dead wife's son had lost his career, his freedom, and his future. The godson who'd been sleeping in an abandoned building had his education funded and his life restored. Sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes the people who hurt children face real consequences. This was one of those times. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.